In a time where animated projects are removed from streaming services, cancelled, renewed and then cancelled, or just stuck in development limbo, we can't trust companies and their executives to keep the animation industry alive, leaving it to the common folk to do that for them. But even then, our options are limited due to animation being both a costly and skillful process, and even if the end result is good, there is no guarantee that it will get the recognition it deserves. So let me introduce you to Murder Drones, a web series that I think is objectively the best animated project on the internet. The first episode begins with a flashback showcasing the distant future after a man-made apocalyptic event. No biological life form is left behind, leaving only the worker drones who sometime after become self-aware and self-sustaining. This, however, does not mean humans are extinct, as the worker drones' parent company, J.C. Jensen, does not take kindly to their products having complete freedom. So they manufacture and deploy 3 disassembly drones that the worker drones dub Murder Drones to the planet with the sole purpose of eliminating any remaining worker drones, and the result ends with a drone genocide, driving the remaining worker drones to go into hiding in a bunker to keep them safe from the murder drones. The flashback ends and we are brought to the present and introduced to Uzi giving this presentation in her class. Uzi is a rebellious, angsty teenage worker drone who, despite being the daughter of Khan, who is the builder of the door to the bunker and is seen as a local hero, it's pretty obvious she is a social outcast who is often ridiculed and mocked. After Uzi's presentation, she reveals to the class that she built a railgun to use against the murder drones, but it doesn't take long for it to malfunction and release a burst of energy, landing her straight in the doctor's office. As she is waiting, she meets a charismatic popular drone she goes to school with named Thad. After a brief conversation, Uzi quickly develops a crush on him and hastily leaves the office after getting flustered. Being fed up with everyone doubting her and being forced to stay in the bunker, she sets out with her railgun to hunt the murder drones. Fortunately, the murder drone's base isn't far away, and while scavenging inside, she finds an energy cell that she uses to give her railgun the power it needs to function properly. One of the murder drones returns to the base and spots Uzi. An intense fight ensues that is more like a game of cat and mouse rather than a fight, but after enough dodging and hiding, Uzi gets the drop on the murder drone and fires her railgun, vaporizing his head. Uzi's victory is short-lived, however, when the murder drone's head completely regenerates. Uzi is prepared for the worst and expects a counterattack, but is surprised when the worker drone malfunctions and is no longer hostile. The murder drone mistakes Uzi for another murder drone and introduces himself as N. N, in actuality, is a really friendly and pretty awkward yes man who gladly will help anyone he can. N brings Uzi to the murder drone's deployment pod and mentions that he looks forward to introducing her to the rest of the murder drones. There's J, the leader of the murder drones who hates N but he praises her anyways. There's V, who's a complete psychopath and barely acknowledges N, who also has a crush on her. N begins to give Uzi a tour of the deployment pod, and she realizes that it's actually a ship that could get them off the planet if it were to be repaired. N mentioned that the murder drones were never taught to land, so he just assumed that it was a one-way trip. Uzi brings up the point to N that if the humans really cared about the murder drones, they would have taught them how to leave the planet, but in reality, the humans are more than likely just going to leave the murder drones for dead once their mission is accomplished. Uzi's discoveries are interrupted when J and V return to the ship. Uzi quickly escapes the ship and sprints straight back to the bunker. It doesn't take long for J and V to notice that N is malfunctioning and fix him, bringing him to the realization that he was talking to a worker drone the entire time. N chases after Uzi in a desperate attempt to redeem himself, and manages to catch up to her right before the main door closes and destroys the control panel. N enters the bunker and starts to slaughter multiple worker drones before catching up to Uzi and knocking the railgun out of her hands. The railgun slides towards Khan, and Uzi begs her dad to pick it up and use it in a fight against N, but he's too petrified with fear and chooses to close the second door, leaving Uzi trapped with N. Before N kills Uzi, J and V arrive and he throws Uzi in a crate to hide her. J is impressed that N finally got them through the main door and gives him the validation he's always been seeking. V finds a vent that easily allows the murder drones to bypass the last bunker door and enthusiastically takes the lead. Before J follows V, N remembers the discussion he had with Uzi back at their ship and brings up the question of what J.C. Jensen plans to do with them once their mission is complete. Jay sees this as a sign of betrayal and disables his functions by planting a patch installed with a virus to shut him down. Jay leaves N for dead to kill the rest of the worker drones, and Uzi comes out of hiding. Uzi tries to follow Jay and V but can't jump high enough to reach the vent. This leaves her no choice but to remove the virus patch and team up with N to get into the vents and save the worker drones. Just as Jay and V are about to kill Thad, who's the only worker drone to stand up to them, Uzi and N confront them, distracting Jay and V long enough for Thad to escape. The duos battle, with Uzi against Jay and N against V. While N is barely able to fend himself off from V's relentless attacks, Uzi immediately gains the upper hand against Jay, with aggressive unorthodox attacks targeting her sensors using a pen. While Jay is stunned, Uzi is about to fire her railgun to finish her off, but before she does, Jay lets out a static shock, completely paralyzing Uzi. Jay begins to monologue as she is about to kill Uzi, but gets too immersed in it and Uzi stabs Jay's own tail into her foot. Jay begins to panic from the pain and falls over. Uzi wastes no time to grab her railgun and stands over Jay, killing her with a final blast. N finishes his fight with V at around the same time by catching her off guard and defeating her with a single blow. The worker drones cheer Uzi and N's victory, but it's short-lived as Uzi tosses the wrench given to her by her father back at him, feeling betrayed that he left her for dead earlier. Uzi announces her self-banishment from the bunker and leaves with N and a tied-up V. Outside the bunker, Uzi monologues her plan to N to take revenge on the humans for sending the murder drones and laughs maniacally as the camera zooms out to space to reveal more landing pods, presumably carrying more murder drones headed towards the planet. Episode 1 ends there. Overall, the show has a very strong pilot, effectively introducing us to the characters, their relationships with each other, and their opinions on the situation that they are in. I will say though that the pilot didn't really steer the cast toward a determined goal, other than vaguely saying that Uzi wants to take revenge on the humans. For better or worse, based off the pilot alone, it's difficult to imagine what's going to happen in future episodes. There doesn't seem to be an overarching goal to push the plot forward, other than the possibility of repairing the murder drone's ship so they can leave the planet. The pilot emphasizes the characters over the plot, and speaking of the characters, they are captivating, but archetypal. Uzi is just an edgy teen with an uncommon addition to this trope of having ambition and determination. Most moody teen characters in media are typically very low energy, but Uzi is the opposite. She has a set goal in mind and is willing to do whatever it takes to achieve it, all while being an eccentric weirdo in the eyes of her peers. The more I thought about this character, the more I realized she's basically a more aggressive version of Dib from Invader Zim. I can't say I'm the biggest fan of the aggressive emo girl trope, but from a writing standpoint, she's unique and relatable enough to be a likable and intriguing lead character. Unfortunately, I can't give as much praise to N. I like N, but when I said that the characters were archetypal, I was mostly referring to N and V. N is the awkward comedy relief character. He's funny, and doesn't feel overshadowed by the other characters, which is impressive because he's actually a pretty basic character. At the moment, he has only one character trait outside his personality, which is his crush on V. This, of course, can change as his character develops, but he just feels a little too one-dimensional at the moment. I wish I could praise his character arc of no longer wanting to kill the worker drones, but it's very sudden and we don't get to see him have much of a self-debate over the issue. One would think it would take more than a single worker drone to convince him, since it jeopardizes getting validation from Jay and winning over V, which beforehand seemed to be his only primary goals. I do want to acknowledge that the scene where N begins to slaughter the worker drones after he gets in the bunker did add great contrast to his character. After seeing his awkward personality, it would have been hard to believe that he's an actual threat, but having the scene play out shortly after multiple scenes presenting him as a character with a naive heart of gold reminds the character that he is a real threat and far from the pushover that the other murder drones and viewer perceive him to be. V, despite being the poster girl, doesn't get much screen time, and we know very little about her, other than that she's the psycho girl trope who loves murdering worker drones and barely knows who N is despite his efforts to interact with her. There isn't much more to say about V, but with her seemingly being one of the three main characters, I'm sure we will get plenty more of her as the show goes on. Lastly, there's Jay. She's authoritative, rude, ruthless, cocky, and for some reason my favorite character. She despises N and relatively seems indifferent towards V. Seemingly the only thing she has any admiration for is JC Jensen. And that's basically all we know about her. Just like V, she doesn't have a lot of screen time, and is pretty archetypal, but in all fairness, she is killed off at the end of the episode, so it wouldn't have made much sense to have her be a very developed character. I do wish she would have had stuck around for maybe another 2 or so episodes before being killed off, since her death in the first episode kind of undermined the murder drone's intimidation factor, but if this character stuck around, the main cast might have been a little bloated, but I still feel that they could have done more with this character. Before I continue, I'll give a quick mention to Thad and Khan. Thad is the popular jock who's willing to stand up for others and is super charismatic. Of all the other characters, he's by far the most grounded, ironically making him not really fit in well with the rest of the cast. Khan is oblivious and gullible, but does care for Uzi. Well, it seemed that way, until he left her to die. He's an alright character, but for the pilot episode he's painted out as cowardly and incompetent in anything that doesn't resolve around doors, making him pretty dislikable, but with most characters like this I'm sure he will get his redemption moment or sacrifice himself for Uzi eventually. In summary, a great pilot episode that felt more like a character introduction rather than a beginning of a story, which leaves plenty of room for the writers to do what they want, but leaves the viewer a little too in the dark. Episode 2 begins with a flashback of N dressed in a butler uniform serving humans, portrayed as only shadows and glowing eyes. While carrying a tray of glasses, N bumps into V, who is dressed in a maid outfit. Their hands accidentally touch, causing them both to blush. The moment is ruined when J, who is also dressed as a maid, kicks N for making a mess. She starts to berate him, but quickly puts on a nice persona when one of their human masters brings a new drone to join the crew. The drone sheepishly peeks out from behind her master, and N wakes up from the flashback, which was just a dream. Uzi is working on repairing the murder drone ship, and notices one of her eyes keeps glitching, showing a strange symbol. V is chained up, not really struggling to escape, but is continuously trying to pick fights with Uzi, which N keeps on having to break up. Meanwhile in the bunker, a worker drone has been tasked with the job of repairing a pole that has appeared in the ceiling. He hears a strange noise coming from the other side of the room, and goes to investigate. He turns a corner and sees Jay's body, opened up with flesh and bones protruding from inside. A small fleshy creature that resembles a heart with a robotic eye in the center sits inside Jay's ribcage and sees the worker drone. The worker drone screams before he's dragged around the corner by the creature. Back outside, Uzi is going full Chuni when Thad comes out and mentions Jay's missing body and multiple worker drones missing, prompting Uzi and N to investigate. Other worker drones continuously keep searching for the missing worker drones only to meet the same fate by being tricked by holograms of the missing worker drones, leading them to the creature's kill zone. Back in the classroom, Khan is arguing with the teacher about Uzi's behavior, and one of the students asks another student what happened to their parents. The student starts to speak Russian, saying that they died, and begins to have a flashback, which is interrupted by the other drone, who sees a hologram of a drone wanting to be let in the classroom. The scene cuts back to Uzi, N, and Thad investigating what happened to Jay's body. They find a strange symbol on the wall that is the same as the one appearing on Uzi's eye. Underneath the symbol, the words Absolute Solver are etched into the wall. Uzi deduces that the Absolute Solver must be a failsafe program that the murder drones have to repair them if they ever get too damaged. N cuts off Uzi's explanation when a dismembered human hand attached to a long cord crawls out of the darkness and grabs Thad's ankle. Uzi and N give chase and end up in the kill zone that all the other victims were alerted to. Instead of the real Thad, they find a hologram of him who begins to try to lower their guard. Fortunately, Uzi and N see through its trick and throw a ninja star into the darkness that cuts the real Thad down, allowing him to finally escape. Uzi asks Jay what she's planning, and the creature descends from the ceiling. The half-constructed head of Jay, attached to a centipede-like body made of mechanical parts and bones, surrounded by cameras that project the holograms, and giant mechanical pincer, speaks in an AI voice explaining that it is not Jay, and Jay is more akin to a puppet it is trying to fix, using the remains of the worker drones it killed. It tells Uzi that it's hurt that she doesn't remember them, and projects a hologram of Uzi's mother. Uzi is unsettled, and asks N why it has that hologram, but N is nowhere to be found. The Absolute Solver then reveals that it captured Khan and rips him in half in front of Uzi, putting her in shock. The Absolute Solver begins to attack Uzi, but N shoots a rocket right in time to stop it. N tells Uzi to shoot the railgun, but she's too in shock to do anything, so she gives it to N. The N she gives it to is actually a hologram, concealing one of the pincers that takes and destroys the railgun. Absolute Solver grabs Uzi and is about to eat her, but stops as numerous pincers and cameras fall to the ground, as the real N starts cutting them from above, freeing Uzi. The damaged railgun begins to overheat, and Uzi and N escape right before it explodes, destroying the Absolute Solver's body. The heart from Jay's original body tries to crawl away and escape, but N stabs it with his tail, seemingly killing it as it transforms into a black ball of energy and floats away. N reaches for Uzi to comfort her, but she flinches away, traumatized by the experience and now frightened by the murder drones. The real and very much alive Khan arrives to comfort Uzi and glares at N as N returns to the ship by himself. Back in the classroom, the Russian-speaking drone sits by herself having a flashback to what happened earlier. Before the other drone was able to open the door that would have let the Absolute Solver in, the Russian girl's eye changed into the same symbol that is appearing on Uzi's eye, and she essentially force pushes the door, jamming it and kept the other drone from letting the Absolute Solver in. A robot bug crawls on the girl's hand, and just like before, she uses her powers to explode it and licks its blood off her face. Inside the murder drone ship, N is sulking about, depressed that Uzi is now scared of him. V asks him what's wrong, but he doesn't respond. V notices that the chain she's attached to is broken, but instead of escaping, she moves the chain back in place so N doesn't notice. The episode ends with Uzi lying in her bed staring at the ceiling that she has covered with obsessive notes and drawings. After episode 1, I had no idea where the show was going, and this episode didn't resolve that, if not make it worse. But, in having so much freedom to do whatever you want in each episode by not boxing themselves in with extensive plot details, the writers gave themselves plenty of room to be as creative as they want, and this episode takes full advantage of that, despite being shorter than its predecessor. This episode is packed with contributions to the plot, character development, and adding numerous elements of intrigue. Uzi is generally no different than she was in the pilot, but by the end of the episode, we do get to see a more vulnerable side of her and see the repercussions of all that she's been through take effect. We also get a scene that highlighted what a social outcast she is. Most shows would show that her classmates are just unfairly judgmental, but in this case, she is shown to actually be kind of a legitimate freak, that while still likable, it wouldn't be unfair to consider her mentally irregular, and not always in the endearing way. N doesn't especially do anything of note, but at the beginning of the episode, we do see that he used to be an innocent worker drone that alongside J and V were all turned into murder drones for some unknown reason. V once again gets the Millie treatment of barely any screen time, and the episode would have been no different if she wasn't there at all. However, at the end of the episode, we do see that she may actually care about N since she had a chance to escape captivity, but chose to stay in N's company instead. We also see in the intro flashback that she might have had a crush on N, so perhaps some of those feelings still linger inside her. I still find it weird that V was such an advertised character, and after 2 episodes has done next to nothing. I'm sure she is going to get her spotlight soon, but if it doesn't happen by the next episode, then this character is really being wasted, and it would have been better off to just introduce her later in the show instead of the pilot episode. It's kind of hard to consider the Absolute Solver as an actual character, but it did resolve some of the problems that I had about Jay's death in the pilot episode. 1, this solves why Jay didn't regenerate like N did when he was damaged. She simply just has a different method of repairing herself that takes a lot longer than N for some reason or another. 2, it does a little more with Jay's character who I felt was wasted. Sure, Jay is still dead, but her death had lasting effects on the episode that came after making her character feel less wasted. I do think that it would have been more impactful if the show had waited 2 or more episodes for the effect of Jay's death to make an impact. It would have lowered the viewer's guard more, so it would have had that, "oh yeah, Jay, I remember her," effect that would have made the Absolute Solver's creation even more impactful. I also want to say that the Absolute Solver's design, mixed with its automated but kind of childish way of speaking, definitely made it my favorite quote-unquote character. And although I doubt it will be coming back anytime soon, if ever, I look forward if it does. The last character worth mentioning is the Russian worker drone. After a quick search on the Murder Drones fan wiki, her name is supposedly Doll. She only spoke one line in Russian, but her presence is still intimidating from her emotionless, violent tendencies that we see at the end of the episode. I'm pretty confident that she is going to play a major role in the next episode, which has been dubbed the prom episode, and when you take a high school girl with psychic powers and put her in a prom setting, it's pretty obvious that things are not going to end well. I kind of hope my expectations are subverted, however, because just like Jay in The Absolute Solver, I would like some time for build-up of the villain's standout episode as opposed to introducing the character and only one episode later having them become the primary antagonist. I think most people agree that building up anticipation usually pays off with a greater impact, like I was saying earlier, but with the way this show is going, it seems like it's going for the villain of the week format. That being said, we are only 2 episodes in, and there's plenty of time for things to change. But that also being said, utilizing the format twice within the 2 episodes we do have is not making me feel that confident that the show is going to desert said format. This show takes a more subtle approach to comedy. Unlike most other shows, this one doesn't rely on celebrity references, sex jokes, or gratuitous amounts of swearing, and instead opts for a lot of throwaway jokes, comically oblivious background characters, and eccentric characters with no self-awareness whatsoever. I would still have a hard time labeling the show as a blatant comedy though, since unlike most comedies, this show almost focuses more on world building and lore, and trying to immerse the viewer rather than making sure the viewer is always laughing. Not to mention the timing on jokes can be completely off, resulting in a lot of moments that feel paused, resulting in the moment becoming awkward instead of comedic. In fact, it's usually the quick and abrupt jokes that make up the majority of the jokes that do land. The show itself is a slower pace overall, which may hurt the comedy at times, but benefits the world building. Besides the intro of the first episode, Murder Drone slowly adds bits and pieces of elements of the world, but never enough for the viewer to completely understand what is going on. Why did N and his crew specifically get elected to become the Murder Drones? Who was that girl at the end of N's flashback? What happened to Uzi's mother, and why did the Absolute Solver have a hologram of her? Why did the Absolute Solver turn into a black floating orb? Why does N have a different regeneration process than J? What does the symbol on Uzi's eye mean, and what is its connection to Doll? The show adds mysteries waiting to be solved, which retains the viewer's interest in the show. A great example of this technique is used in its maximum effect in Gravity Falls. Gravity Falls made sure there was a mystery or incomplete picture for the audience to theorize about, and that assured that they would come back for the next episode to get another piece of the puzzle. This built up not only good viewer numbers, but also a strong community around theorizing and trying to solve the mysteries. It wouldn't be a stretch to say Murder Drones is trying to mimic the same method, and that does still set it apart from most animated projects airing today. Another aspect that sets the show apart from all the others is its slight horror elements that were really highlighted in the second episode, but still were on display in the first. The Murder Drones are effectively robot vampires because they need to drink drone oil to keep from overheating. They have a wall built of worker drones' bodies. There are multiple scenes in episode 2 that are shot just like a horror movie. And the Absolute Solver is designed like something straight out of John Carpenter's The Thing. I think if the show keeps on embracing its horror elements, it could capitalize on the same audience that enjoyed shows like Invader Zim, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Salad Fingers, and even Gravity Falls. I can't think of many modern animated shows that bridge the gap between animation, comedy, and horror, while not going to extremes in any of those directions that would make comedy undermine the horror, and vice versa. But even with its unique mystery and horror elements, the aspect that stands out more than any quality of the show is the animation. I prefer 2D shows, and it wouldn't be a stretch to say that I dislike 3D animation, but against all odds, I am still able to enjoy the show, and one could argue that the 3D animation makes the show stand out and even makes it more distinctive. I don't know the exact costs of 3D animation versus 2D animation, but if the 3D animation does cost more, it without a doubt is an unnecessary waste of resources. The 3D animation doesn't really add anything to the show, but at the same time doesn't take much away from it. The only benefit to 3D animation I could think of is that 3D animation takes less time to produce, resulting in a quicker episode rollout, and if that's the case, I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to pretend this show is flawless, but when I titled the video as the best web series, I genuinely mean it. The concept of a 3D animated comedy horror cartoon with a premise of a post-apocalyptic planet taken over by robots being hunted down by robot vampires is as much bizarre as it is original. The comedy may be hit and miss, but even though it's not really what you would call an adult show, its humor is still more mature than the majority of these so-called adult shows. I didn't even mention the music earlier, but the soundtrack is the kind of quality that you would hear in a AAA production. And even then, the fast-paced synths are so distinct that I can't think of an animated project that has music like this. Everything about this show's production is creative and original, with the only tropes being credited to some of the characters, but they are written in a way where it sometimes feels as if these tropes are being parodied instead of fully emulated. I can't praise this show enough, and best of all, now's the prime time to get invested in the show. With only 2 episodes out at the time of writing, and the next episode set to premiere on February 17th, we don't have to wait long until we get our next fix. On top of that, Glitch Productions just finished producing their last 2 shows, and with seemingly nothing else to produce until late 2023, Murder Drones is in full swing, with presumably a new episode each month, and you best believe I will be here to cover each of them.
Bite me. Bite me! Bite me! Bite me! Bite me! Let's go, Anne. Everyone here can bite me. Bite me! Therapy's fun.